Hello, everyone, and welcome to Biohackers Lab. I'm your host, Gary Kerwin, and on today's episode, I have Sean McCormick. Sean is the owner of 2 flotation tank centers in the Seattle region of the US. He is also a life coach and has a keen interest in how to optimize our lives. Thanks for coming on today, Sean.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So one of the reasons I got you on is because I got to speak to a previous guest on the show, and that was from Natural Stacks. And so, yeah, the guys at Natural Stacks, they love your flotation. And I mean, they make brain supplements. And yet they were saying like going for a float is just a whole different experience. So I thought, no, I've never done flotation myself. So I want to learn so much more about flotation today.
Yeah. We can go as deep as you want. I mean, the water in a float tank is only 10 inches, but you and I can go as deep as you want into the topic. The Natural Stacks guys, I believe that you spoke with Roy.
Yeah, Roy Krebs, yeah.
And I've been an ambassador for Natural Stacks for a couple of years, and I am a giant fan of their products. It's about being our best, and that's at the heart of what biohacking is, changing, modifying your internal environment and your external environment for optimal performance. And
that's why
means so many different things.
Yeah, and that's why I thought, especially thinking again, okay, so someone like Roy is taking supplements to enhance his brain, so he's already in an altered state, and then he says when he goes in through a flotation, it's just another level. So we're looking here that, there's a lot of neurological benefits, so brain benefits here. And that really interests me. So already I didn't realize. So you're saying that the water in a flotation tank is only 10 inches deep?
Yeah. So it's 10 inches deep. It's like that. And there's 1,000 pounds of Epsom salt that's diluted. It takes about a day and a half to dilute that level of Epsom salt into the water, because every time you add water, the water decreases in temperature. And so, it doesn't take much. And we're talking about, 350-pound offensive linemen for the Seattle Seahawks that float just perfectly in 10 inches of Epsom salt water. It's all you need, really, that depth.
Okay, interesting. So, with flotation, is it uniform, the ingredients that go into the water, or does each center sort of have their own recipe or twist that they do? So you mentioned Epsom salts.
It's pretty standardized. I mean, just about every float center adds the same amount. I mean, some of the Zen Float Tent, which is a residential sort of a consumer grade at home float tank, I think they only need 800. But it's really standard, and that's it. I mean, it's Epsom salt. We add Himalayan crystal salt as well from time to time, because there's added electrolytes. I don't know if you know much about Himalayan crystal salt, but there's 92 minerals and electrolytes in Himalayan crystal salt. Clearly, I'm a dork for water and salt, so we add that too, hoping that gets absorbed through the body as well. But it's pretty standard. Yeah, it's 1,000 pounds of Epsom salt, and that's really all you need. That provides the buoyancy for your float experience, and then that's what helps all of the physiological benefits, from lubricating the synovial fluid in your joints to decreasing swelling to increasing circulation, and we can get into all the different benefits there. But it's pretty standardized.
Yeah, we'll definitely get onto the benefits section in a bit, but just so I can get my head around it, and also the listeners to it who've never, it may be people like me who've never experienced it. So I'm going to go in. Yeah. What temperature is the water?
The temperature of the water is 93.5 degrees, and were you expecting that specific temperature?
No.
So the external temperature of our skin is 93.5 degrees, and so it's specifically tempered in that way so that you don't know where the temperature of the water meets the temperature of the atmosphere inside the float tank meets the temperature of your skin. So it's created in that way so that you sort of lose track of the water and the barrier and the transition between the water and the solution that you're floating in and the atmosphere inside the float tank or float pod is you can't decipher it. So what ends up happening is you don't know which way is up or which way is down. You just feel like a baby floating in outer space in this sort of um, really held, enclosed sort of space. So, for some folks, for me, 93 and a half is a little warm. I run pretty hot. I've got Celtic wolf blood in my body. So for me, 93 and a half is a little warm. So I tend to go to, 92 and 92.7, 93.1 in that range. But the standard practice is 93 and a half degrees.
So do you get clients already who try customize their float experience even from a temperature point of view?
Some do. Yeah. Some ask for an increase, especially, we're in the, Pacific Northwest and it's temperate. And I think especially women run a little cooler. Their internal temperature is a little bit cooler. So they might like it a little bit hotter. I know that some other float centers actually purposefully pump up the heat a little bit to make it a little bit more cozy. But for me, that misses the point because it's not supposed to be warm. It's not supposed to be cold. It's supposed to be just right. But we do have some folks that say, hey, can you either leave the lid open so that it has, so that it cools off a little tiny bit, or can you pump the heat up just a little tiny bit for my float? And we try to accommodate people as best we can.
Okay, already I can see there's a top tip for people who do float, to think that you can sort of change and alter the temperature to maybe suit your particular situation or your feelings. So you can customize it even more.
Yeah, and that range is really a half a degree either way. So it's pretty minimal, but you can tell.
Okay. And then explain the pod to me. You mentioned it already. So this tank, I'm envisioning where it's this, is it like a flatbed or a round tube? And then you lift the lid off and you go in and you lay down, and then you close the lid down on the person, do you? And then they're in complete darkness.
That's right. Yeah. There are different manufacturers. There's different standardized sort of float tanks versus float pods. Float pods are often referred to as sort of like the circular or more oval sort of rounded edges. Isopod in London is a manufacturer that's been around for a very long time. Really sort of spearheaded this sort of rounded egg shape sort of float pod. There's a manufacturer out of Arizona that's called the Float Pod, and it's oval in shape with rounded edges, versus a float tank. We have both at our float centers at Float Seattle and Float Bellevue. In Float Seattle, we have float tanks. We have the Ocean Float Room, which is 8.5 feet tall on the inside, so you can step into it and lay down. It's wide and long. We have an Oasis float tank, which is more sort of typical. I think when people think of float tanks, it's shorter. You have to get in and lay back. We like to call it. It's a tad more sci-fi rather than what some people look at and say, "Oh my God, it's a coffin." Well, it's not a coffin.
Yeah, that's already where I'm going with this.
Yeah, everybody does, and that's fine. And then we have Samadhis, who are the original manufacturers of commercial float tanks. So the Samadhis are similar in that sort of squarish, boxy. So we have those in Seattle, and then we have float pods, Evolution float pods in our Bellevue location.
So I'm guessing the flotation experience is going to be the same no matter what one. It just depends on the amount of volume inside that the person has when they're laying in it. That are some of the roofs closer to your face than others? I don't know.
Yes. So in each of these instances, you're closed off. There are people that have built like custom float areas or float rooms, and the float seems as though the float industry is building larger and larger float tanks, float rooms, cabins, which really are sort of enclosed, almost like giant showers that are actually built into the wall. I think that there's benefits and setbacks to both of those. There's going to be, the bigger the space, the more sound transfer there's going to be. So a drop of water, a splash of water, a freight truck 2 blocks away may echo a little bit more in a larger cabin, which is the reason why I prefer something that's a little bit more enclosed, because it's quieter, it's more it's more compact. But in each of these situations, yes, the point is to shut the door, not lock it, but just shut the door, to get to that pure dark, that deep, that darker than dark, full sensory deprivation.
Okay, yeah. So already that's another top tip, just to let people know you don't lock the door, so you can pop the lid open and move if you need to, if you felt claustrophobic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I think I've got a gist, and hopefully everyone's got a picture in their mind what one of these tanks looks like if they haven't been there. And now we've already touched on some of the benefits there. Maybe if you could run through, how would you say what some of the regular benefits that you would tell someone who's brand new to flotation?
There are so many that we've found over the past 6 years that it's best to keep it as simple as possible. And we've simplified it into really 3 categories. People float for pain relief, stress relief, and meditation. And the pain relief is from the Epsom salt, which activates your parasympathetic system. It's your sort of rest and digest, lowered heart rate, increased blood flow, the sort of non-voluntary physiological operations of the body.
Your chill out phase.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's stimulated more strongly. That your parasympathetic system comes on while you float. Yeah. Because what happens is you're not calculating or crunching numbers. You're not exposed to input. And what happens is when you're not exposed to input, your brain says and your body says, oh, I can just do my thing. I'm not crunching numbers. I'm not analyzing data. I'm not making connections between things. It's just my internal space. It's just my inner space. And so within the Epsom salt and the parasympathetic system, you get this pain relief, increased dopamine, increased endorphins, decreased cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine, the sort of fight or flight responses, stress responses, those go down. The studies show that those go down around the 20, 25 minute mark. And in place, you get this influx and increase of dopamine and endorphins and the sort of warm fuzzies that make us feel good. The stress relief is just from being away from the world. I mean, it makes sense, right? Mm-hmm. Like most of us spend all day or most of the day on computers, on our phones, driving, shaking our fingers at people and dealing with problems. And that's how we live our life now. And then we get home and we make dinner and we watch TV and we, parent or we, do our thing. And then we have our phone in our face until it's time to go to sleep. As a biohacker, I'm hoping you and I both don't do this sort of thing, but phone in your face until you go to sleep, and then looking at Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, and then, okay, it's time to go to sleep. Boop, airplane mode. Hopefully you're doing airplane mode.
Yeah.
And then hopefully you're not putting your phone underneath your pillow, but close to you. And then it's time to go to sleep. So in the entire span of a day, besides like the shower and the bathroom, you're not having any time to be by yourself, to breathe. If you don't have a meditation practice, you're not having that time to quiet your mind and to relax. And so what the float tank does and provides for a lot of people in tech, we have a ton of people that work at Amazon that float with us, and Microsoft and Boeing and Concur and Expedia. We have a lot of professional athletes that are just so stimulated by their practice and their training and the exposure to the media that this is really their only time to have to themselves. When, 1 hour, hour and a half in a float tank is really their only time to check out. So that's where the stress relief comes in. And the meditation, it makes sense. It's basically like a incubator for meditation. It cancels out external stimuli, which is what you're trying to do in meditation anyway, by focusing either on a mantra or breath work or whatever you do in your meditation practice. This does that for you. It really sort of clears out a space for you to just focus on your breath and chill out. And because you're, again, not crunching numbers or dealing with stimuli, you get that faster theta brainwave state. You get to that meditative state a lot quicker. So those are the really three core benefits that we tell people: is pain relief, stress relief, and meditation. It also helps you sleep too.
Yeah, well, already what I can see and what you've touched on there is that continuous connectivity that people have, and that they are never not stimulated. And especially in the modern world now, you talked about, say, like your cell phone constantly stimulating you with your apps or whatever, social media, emails, doesn't matter. But even the world itself, advertising is trying to grab your attention. There's just so much that's always trying to keep you connected, keep you alert. And I must admit, it's very interesting where I believe now it's so hard for people to just not feel like they need to concentrate on something or be distracted by something. I mean, a classic example for me is when I go to, I have young kids, and if I go to a playground, I've noticed time and time again that you'll go into the playground and the first thing parents will do is pop their phone out when the kids are playing, and they'll look at the phone. It's like seems to be an inability in society nowadays to just not look at their phone, for example, because that downtime, that sensory deprivation time is just it's like an awkwardness now, I feel, for a lot of people.
I'm with you 100%. I also have two small kids, and it's sad. I mean, it really is, because it's so easy to dive into a world and be entertained by something. I mean, you have a you can learn anything under the sun in a millisecond in your pocket. That's tough to compete with really anything, let alone continuing to be present with your children, to actually go and play with them, to go interact with them, to have a conversation with the other parents that are at the park.
Mm-hmm.
Like I truly believe that there is a disconnect socially, where we're getting worse and worse at doing this. We're losing our skills of conversation because people do this so frequently.
Mm-hmm.
And you look up and you're like, oh, hey, how's it going? And then you go back to your phone, and it's just so easy to check into that. And it's sad a little bit. I don't know. Yeah, I'm with you.
But that's where, when you mentioned how you have all the big tech companies and the employees like to come, do a flotation with you, and it's the reason I can truly understand with them, where they live in a very connected, environment with their workplace, and that respite coming to your center it's like a luxury now to be allowed to not be connected.
Yeah, it is. It's the antithesis. It's the antithesis to sort of our modern world, especially for people who work in tech and program, game developers. It's the antithesis, and it's also the antidote. It's also the thing that will help balance us out from a brain chemistry aspect, from a stress aspect. It's you're right. It's a luxury. If you're staring at a computer all day, and or if you're just a high powered business person or a type A person, and you've got a lot of stuff going, if you're like myself, business owner, life coach, speaker, blogger. I mean, I'm busy most of the day. And so I prioritize my time to myself. I prioritize my meditation practice. I prioritize exercise and flotation therapy, because I know how important it is. And you're right. It's either that or going camping and leaving your phone at home. Like, it's a scary thought for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, hopefully I'm going to get a psychologist or a psychiatrist on about internet addiction and digital addiction. There's some great TEDx talks about that out there. And just, that fear when people give their phone to someone else and they're disconnected from their tech for a little while. It's right. Bad.
And in this case, you literally can't bring that phone in there with you. You can't take it in the shower. You can take it in the bathroom. But
so I can't get one of those waterproof phones and bring them in with me.
Well, you might actually. Right. Well, and on that note, not to go off on another tangent, but there are some float centers and there are some float tank manufacturers that have set up like screens on the inside of the float tanks for sort of like, one guy was setting up, sort of morphing images just to sort of trip out on, or you can watch videos of your golf swing to improve your golf swing or your tennis swing or whatever. So there is that application too, this sort of like hyper learning, biohacking, language acquisition, and so forth too. But that's VR in a float tank. If people are doing it, people are trying it, and there's something to it. There's something there, and I believe it's exciting. But for most of us don't need any more of that. Most of us need less stimulation. So actually, like putting your phone on airplane mode and getting into a float tank for a 1 hour float session is about the most relaxing experience you can have, honestly.
And I forgot to ask, do people wear swimsuits when they go into the float tanks?
Buck naked.
Okay, so you're going in your birthday suit.
That's right.
Fantastic. Okay, so even that experience, I guess, that someone's stripping down to nakedness and they're getting into this, that must be a part of the whole experience. Just to think, wow, okay, how often in life am I actually in a state for like an hour or an hour and a half where I'm butt naked?
Yeah, primal.
Yeah,
getting back to basics for sure.
Wow. Okay. So, would you mind just if you know a little bit about it? I'm not quite sure, but like the history of flotation. Like, when did this start? Who started this? How did it even come about?
So, Dr. John Lilly was supported by the military in the late 50s to do some research into sensory deprivation, and he's written lots of books. Programming and medical programming, the human biocomputer, Eye of the Hurricane, or Eye of the Cyclone. He was the guy who connected and figured out communication with dolphins, was giving LSD to dolphins and talking to dolphins. Fascinating person, like really, really ahead of his time. And what Dr. Lilly was funded for was to figure out what happens in sensory deprivation. And the frame of mind before that was, if you don't have sensory input, then you just fall asleep. If you're not being inundated with information, that you just sort of slip into sleep state. And what happens is the opposite. All of these other systems kick on. And so they experimented with, vertical float tanks, where you're being tugged down by your ankles into the water, weighted down up to your head so that you're floating vertically and bobbing up and down with your breath. They practice like with big snorkels and elaborate devices that allow you to, sort of float face down, but continue to breathe, almost like, old school scuba gear. And he went full in and started to come out with some pretty incredible research, both scientifically and anecdotally, about people's experiences. And then he quickly started to work with the Perrys, Glenn and Lee Perry, who are in California, and they created, together with Lilly, the Samadhi float tank. Are you familiar with the term Samadhi?
No.
Samadhi, it's SAMADHI, and it's a term that means like the line between you and me is dissolved. This sort of like interconnectedness, this sort of total consciousness. Okay. Between like the observer and the observed, and kind of cool name, very cool name. And then they started creating commercial float tanks in the early 60s, mid 60s, and there are a fair number of people that float with us now that sort of remember when they first came out and were into it when they were young. And they started popping up kind of all over the place. They gained popularity. They were tightly, they were closely connected because of John Lilly's research and his work and his affinity for psychedelics. There was this sort of connection between psychedelic use and float tanks, and for better or worse, there was a strong association there for people. And over time, it sort of ebbed and flowed. It got sort of lost popularity in the late 70s and got popular again in the 80s, and then lost popularity in the 80s. So it's gone through these waves of use. But there's float tanks in Olympic training facilities all over the world. There's float tank centers. I mean, in the last 6 years, there's been massive growth in the States with float centers. We were the first float center to open in the Seattle, Washington area for like 15 years. We were the first to open, and now there's about a dozen float centers in our local region, our local area. Same thing. It's the same thing applies to the rest of the country. So it's gained popularity again, and I think it is an answer to our super plugged in, super stressed out lives. I think people need this, and they need yoga, and they need biohacking and breath work and cold immersion therapy and all these things that help us kind of get back to ourselves.
So you touched on because when flotation came out, it was the 60s and 70s when people were experimenting with a whole bunch of chemicals. And I mean, we're even in this day and age in 2017, we're still experimenting with chemicals. And that's where I'm thinking more nootropics here, or brain supplements. I'm guessing you must draw that crowd who love taking supplements that enhance your brain function, and then they drop themselves into a flotation experience. Or do you even, I don't know, as a float center, could you recommend certain supplements that you found that people benefit from before they go, or that sort of experience?
We do. Yeah, we sell a number of nootropic supplements that people can use for their float, before their float, after their float. Yeah, I think if you're interested in consciousness, if you're interested in tinkering with making yourself perform at a higher level, then you're going to gravitate towards finding those things that are like floating, like cryotherapy, like yoga, breath work, meditation. You're going to sort of go to those things. And, the way that I think about it is that I often float. Well, I've floated so many times. It's hard. I don't want to speak in generalities because I've floated so much, and they've all been so different. I'm almost up to 600 float sessions in the last 6+ years. And just when I think, I kind of do it like this or this. No, I do it for a lot of different reasons. But there are active sort of problem solving, to-do listing, resolving a conflict, thinking creatively about an idea. There's those sorts of active problem solving, critical thinking floats, which are perfect for products like Siltep, products like their dopamine brain food. We also just brought in a nootropic tea, adaptogenic. It's a company called Wise Ape. It's this awesome tea that stimulates your mind. Doing that before going into float, you're going to have, it's going to be active, and you're going to think about a lot of stuff. And it's nice to be agile in that moment when you're like, okay, my brain switched on. It's time to boogie. Let's think about my relationships and my job and my spiritual growth and where I want to be in 10 years. And that's fine. And that's cool. The other float is just get in there and shut up. Just relax. Try, just focus on your breath. And I tell that to people all the time. Like, just lay back, chill out, focus on your breath. There's a lot of different breath work that I suggest to folks. There's visualization exercises to get the most out of it. But yeah, I mean, that sort of biohacker crowd that's interested in nootropics and interested in optimizing their brain, there's lots that you can do in there.
So do you do any, if I came to a float center and I'm a complete newbie, do you do some sort of training before someone goes in the tank, or is there any protocol that's?
No, it's about a 2-minute walkthrough. It's a pretty quick little, I could give it to you now if you want to hear it.
Okay. Yeah, so you explain it. So that I'm just thinking when you were talking about the breath work there. So it's even, I can imagine that if I'm laying down in that suspended state, and as you've touched on already, because of the buoyancy of the water, you actually you don't realize that you're actually in the water after a period of time. It kind of just feels like that's the word, floating, that you're just there. And I'm guessing initially when people get in, they must be breathing fast, breathing heavy, but then that changes if they become more mindful of their breathing rate or their breathing depth. And but that's just something that they would naturally experience and experiment as they go through their float experience.
Yeah, it's important to not program people, I think, before their float. You don't want to tell them, "Hey, you're going to keep your eyes open," because if you keep your eyes open through the float, you're going to see these green blobby things that are going to swirl this way, and you're going to think that they're this, or you may experience this. There's a visual sensation, a visual that's really common. It looks like a sunrise. It's this in the blackness when your eyes are sort of at, if midnight is straight up, they're sort of at like 9:30, 10 o'clock. There's this sensation and there's this visualization of light down here. It's pitch black. There's light down here, and it sort of gets darker and darker, sort of like a sunrise. But we're not going to describe that to people. We're not going to have people look for that or sort of expect that, because that's going to shape and frame their experience. Like, one of the most important things is to just let them go in there and figure it out on their own. Do you do okay by yourself for an hour? Are you uncomfortable being by yourself for an hour? Why? Look at that. Is this uncomfortable for you? Why? Can you not sit still? Can you not, or do you not like yourself? There's work to do there, and so we don't really, my staff, I have trained them to not program people before going into the float tank. So if you're like chest breathing in there, like, you need to figure out how to sort that out. You need to figure out how to belly breath. You need to figure out how to move your body into a position that's most comfortable for you, because you're growing, you're pushing yourself in that place where you're figuring out how your breath works and how your body feels and what your brain is doing. There's a really important process in which you discover yourself a little bit in that hour.
So you've also got me thinking, Ray, because it's something I think I've come across before, but with everyone with different body shapes and sizes, and especially of the spine, some people are more curved, or some people have a bigger curve in their neck. Do people, when you were wriggling around there, I was just thinking, you get flotation pillows even, don't you? That some people feel they need a pillow in the tank, or
some people do feel like they need a pillow. There's a product from it's called a Float Halo. It's this really brilliant, really simple design from our friends up in Canada. It's basically a foam donut with a notch for your neck that you put back here. It's really unobtrusive. It supports your head just enough so that you feel. Yeah, I mean, if you've got soccer injuries or rugby injuries, I'm trying to connect with the
football in the UK.
Yeah, then your back may be a little tweak. If you've been in a car accident or a motorcycle accident like I have, there's parts of your body that are maybe not aligned or symmetric the way that they should be. So, you can use a pool noodle, especially for pregnant women. Floating is excellent for pregnant women for a lot of different reasons, which you can imagine. But a pool noodle underneath your knees kind of gives you some extra buoyancy at the hips to help support that belly. A float halo, behind your head to help support your head. If you're kinked or you've got whiplash or you're a chin forward kind of person. There's people have different ways, but even in that, there's an important process of sort of like going back to neutral. So if you're in there with 6 floaties and a rubber ducky ring and a snorkel and all this gear, right? Like you may be cheating yourself from that experience of like actually like resetting, getting your shoulders down and back, getting your chin back and your chin up, getting the traction in your spine. I float with my arms up, and I suggest that people do. That's one thing that we do suggest. Opens up your chest. So many of us are clicking and doing this and driving, and when you float with your arms up and your chin back, and you sort of urge your chin back and urge and decrease the tension in the back of your neck, you're able to go back to that sort of neutralized posture where your shoulders are down and back and your chin is up. So everybody's different, especially if you have, some damage, some physiological damage from injury or whatever, or just bad posture or whatever. But it's a process.
Yeah. And that's again, what I was just thinking, that exactly what you said, everyone's in this forward drawn position because life is just stimulating you to go more forward. And when you are in a laying, and just even there, just that thought that you're going to be laying on your back for an hour, and that people are going to fidget, and they might feel, I want to turn onto my side. Do you get that? Do people feel like they want to turn onto their side, like they're laying in bed?
Yeah, they do. They do. It's really hard to do. It's damn near impossible to flip onto your side. I mean, just like the mast of a boat, in order to flip, you're so low, right? So in order to flip, you have to literally put your hands up above your head and then do this to have the center of gravity turn you over. I sleep on my side. I don't sleep on my back. So as I'm sleeping on my side, as I'm floating, so I've done a number of really long floats. The longest float that I've done is 9.5 hours, and during that experience,
continuous.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and in that float, for sure, I had this sort of instinct to roll over. Roll onto. Well, I guess depending on which side my wife is, I sorry, honey, I kind of roll away from her. This is what I do. So I I roll away from her. So I did have that sort of sensation or that urge to, but if you do, you're going to get salt water in your eye and it's so salty that it does sting a bit. But yeah, people do have the urge. We had a professional football player that just couldn't get out of his mind that he wanted to float on his face. He wanted to float face down. And so he bought a snorkel and floated a couple of times face down just to have that experience of like, what does that feel like? What does that do to my back? And it's logistically pretty challenging to do that effectively. But it's, again, being on your back is not a typical thing for most people. But
yeah. And especially for that length of time when you're conscious, because most people would get very fidgety and think, no, I need to do something, like I need to flip over, and especially as you mentioned, tummy sleepers. So someone who's used to, I'm just chilling. I feel like turning onto my stomach. So complete that sensation experience that you're going to go through again there. Fascinating. Yeah. So really the key aspect here is sensory deprivation, which you touched on with the original research. And just that where probably flotation is one of the best sensory deprivation therapies that people can do commercially.
It is. I mean, there's such a thing called dry rest. Rest stands for restricted environmental stimulation therapy. So rest, restricted environmental stimuli therapy or stimulation. Sorry, guys. The float people are going like this right now. You tell me. There is such thing as dry rest, which is basically like a cabin with pillows that's quiet and dark. But yeah, as far as sensory deprivation, you can go into those super quiet rooms. There's a few of those in the country where it's like super foam. It's so quiet that it's loud inside your head. It's not like that. But yeah, this is the most effective sensory deprivation experience is in a float tank or a float pod.
And when you mentioned the darkness, we're talking so black you can't even see your hand in front of your face.
Right.
So this is pitch black again, which in this modern world with artificial light everywhere, people are just not used to being in complete darkness.
Totally. Well, and again, from a biohacker standpoint, the darkness stimulates your immunity. When you're in the dark, pitch black, it stimulates your ability to fight sickness and disease. So there's that aspect of it too. And there's also an interesting distinction between floating, obviously in the pitch black, where you can't see anything, let alone your face, your hand in front of your face. But there's a distinction between floating with your eyes closed and floating with your eyes open. And when you float with your eyes closed, your body knows what's going on there. It's like, I'm relaxing, I'm meditating, I'm sleeping, I'm doing whatever. When your eyes are open, it's very different. And your eyes are looking for stuff. Like, where's all the stuff? We're looking for stuff. There's no stuff. Where's all the stuff? And what happens is, typically, you get what's called hypnagogic images or hypnagogic, and that is basically like the precursor to visuals. And so, when I first opened the float center, I was delighted because my dad came in and floated, and he came out, and he was like, that was really cool. And I was like, well, tell me about it. What did you experience? And he goes, this purple geometric orb wouldn't leave me alone. And I was like, cool, tell me more. And what he was saying is that this purple thing came in from the left and was spinning and spinning, and then he started to mess with it a little bit and was spinning it the other way and moving it around. And so this hypnagogic imagery can give way to like full on visuals. Again, unaided by anything, but just you get these visuals, and when your eyes are open, you're more likely to have a psychedelic experience, an unaided, like real psychedelic experience where you're seeing things you don't normally see. So oftentimes for people who've floated a couple of times, I will suggest that they keep their eyes open, because when you do keep your eyes open, you get a little fractal action, or you get like a little blobby thing, or for some folks, it's really common to see like a dot of light. And it's like, what is that? Oh my gosh, I'm looking for it. You're doing this, and what is that? I've done some work with that dot. I've done a lot of work with that dot. And you can actually like project yourself toward it. I mean, now we're getting into like astral projection. We're getting into out of body experiences, which is something that I'm keen on. But you can do some work with that dot too. And especially with your eyes open, there's no dot there. I mean, well, depending on how you look at it, there may or may not. But this sort of visual imagery with your eyes open lends itself to sort of deep exploration of your own consciousness. And you're not just like, okay, I'm here to chill out, I'm relaxing, I'm floating, doing a thing, I'm out. No, mess with that dot. Create a scene for yourself. Like some folks get new music they've never heard before, starts to just play. And for some folks, they even like sit up and open the door, and shit, that's gone. I don't hear it anymore. And they go back in and it turns back on. Some people get full on like sitcom scenes. There was a story, ABC News did a story where a news anchor came in to our float center in Seattle a couple of years ago. You can Google ABC News altered states or sensory deprivation, and he floated, and this was on camera. This guy did not want, his name's Neil Karlinsky. What's up, Neil? He did not want to be vulnerable in this moment because he's on national television. And what happened for him is he went in and floated, and he had this experience where he was back home in the house he grew up in. Like, detail. The kitchen table, the family dog, his family, everybody's there. He walks into his room. He sees his father. In his actual life, his father had just passed away, but he was like not just having like a lucid dream, not just having like a cool visual experience, but like really being there. And that's a very common theme for people that we've talked to and people that have talked about their float experience, is to like go back to like relive the first day of kindergarten, or to like go back to an experience that they've had in their childhood for whatever reason. There's just this like, maybe before, I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting. So people, they it's like becoming present in an event that their brain wants to go through there. So they.
Yeah, and like fully present in it, not just thinking about it, not just remembering it, but like being in their body in that moment at the first day of school. I mean, it's happened with me, not the first day of school, but kindergarten. I've relived days of kindergarten before. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. So I'm just thinking here again. So we're talking about the sensory deprivation, the blackness, but it got me thinking, circadian rhythm stuff. This is getting a bit biohacky, but when people are trying to, reset their body clocks, I'm just wondering, people who struggle to sleep, would they benefit from doing flotation in the late afternoon? Or have you even come across this type of situation before?
Yeah, floating absolutely helps sleep for a number of reasons. Again, the Epsom salt relaxes your body. The magnesium that you absorb through your skin, you use, and helps you relax, helps release tension in your muscles, lowers your heart rate, and relaxes you. And what we found, what I've seen sort of anecdotally in the thousands and thousands of people that I've seen come through our doors, is floating at night really does help go to sleep. You have to get in your car and drive home, of course. But
Or you catch in the States, you got Uber, and the rest of the world, hey, you could just
yeah,
get a taxi that takes you home while you're chilled
totally.
out in the back.
Yeah, exactly. Well, 5 years from now, you're going to get in your self-driving car and say, "Okay, go home," and then you can fall asleep in the back, on the way home.
Yeah.
But it does help. It does help immensely. It also helps with jet lag. Helps reset and get you back on the right clock. I know that there are biohacks where as soon as you get on the plane, you set the clock. You set your clock on your phone for your destination. Doing power naps or using red light to manage your cycles. I've seen lots of people hack their sleep with floating for sure.
Yeah, so I was just the circadian rhythm stuff always interests me, and so I was thinking you might find that people might come at different times of the day to stimulate different parts of them in a way. So like a morning float with your eyes open versus a late afternoon float with your eyes closed, but just an
Yeah,
idea that people could
yeah.
play with.
Honest, a float, a 7 a.m. I mean, we have lots of people that float at 7 a.m. before their work day. You go in, you have half a cup of coffee, you take your Siltep from Natural Stacks, you do your breath work, and you plan your day or plan your week that Monday morning. That's going to be a pretty productive day. You're going to have a lot of perspective and a lot of clarity on what you need to do that day. That is obviously a much more active float than floating at night. I prefer floating. My ideal time for floating is Sunday morning, 8:30, after a really hard workout, after I have fasted for 18 hours. So like I haven't eaten anything on Saturday. I haven't eaten anything Sunday morning. I get up, go for a run, throw some kettlebells around, and then get into a float in a fasted state. That's my favorite time. And then the rest of my day is roses and sunshine and, unicorns. You've done so much for yourself in such a short window of time by exercising and then meditating essentially. Now I'm thinking about it, like, oh, that sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah, well, what you got me thinking there is taking ketones. So your body's produced loads of ketones, which are great for the brain, and then you're actually stimulating your brain even more whilst you're in that different fuel source state. So
Yeah.
yeah, that would be interesting. I had a ketone researcher, Brianna Stubbs, on, and she's making the research group that she's with, it makes ketone esters, not ketone salts, so the esters. But I'm just thinking the day will come when people come to a flotation center and they take back some esters and a whole other state again.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how many times do people float? What's a flotation schedule like typically?
If you're an effective person, if you're a high achiever, twice a week is going to be beneficial, especially if you're if that's kind of the only thing you do, if that's your go-to, you're not really doing massage or chiropractic or anything like that. Twice a week is going to keep you operating at a really high level. For most folks, they don't really need that much. Once a week or twice a month, just to kind of reset a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
It's effective. We offer various membership levels. That being said, a close friend of mine is a president and director of a venture capital fund, and he was floating every other day for a while. He now floats about 3-4 times a week, but for 3 months he was literally floating every other day. He was getting such a high ROI on the time spending in there, planning his day, planning conversations, planning pitches, thinking critically about the fund. He was optimizing, he was biohacking his way through his fund by being able to think like that. We have a number of Seahawks, Seattle Seahawks that float with us. Russell, I don't know if you know the name Russell Wilson, a quarterback for the Seahawks. He floats once or twice a week during the season when he's in season, for body recovery and for time to himself. He's a hard charging guy who doesn't sleep very much because he works his ass off all the time. And, for him, twice a week in season is just right. So, if you're floating for like recovery from a car injury, one thing that's really common that we've had doctors prescribe. This is based on a Swedish study that talked about how to basically reset the central nervous system after injury. And workplace burnout was part of it. In fact, it was about workplace burnout. I don't want to misquote. And it was basically this pattern. It was a float, a day off, a float, a day off, a float, 3 days off, float, day off, float, 3 days off, doing that cycle 3 times. So 9 floats in 27 days was effective and clinically proven to reduce cortisol, reduce workplace burnout, increase well-being. So if you're recovering from an accident, that's an excellent place to be. That's an excellent cycle to get into.
Okay. And the duration of the floats, do you get really short floats? And you did a really long one at 9 hours, but you mentioned hour and a half, but is that this pretty much the set time, the hour and a half mark? Or is there even a quicker, like Tabata type float where you just...
Yeah. We offer an hour standard. Some float centers offer 90 minutes as a standard. We tinkered for a while and found that an hour is plenty. So that's the most common duration. We offer an hour or 2.5 hours. So for people that have been floating for a while, that really, an hour, your body kind of knows when an hour is. And so for a lot of people who have floated 5, 6, 10, 40, 50, 60 times, they get to a point where they're in and they're floating and they they know when their float is over, and then the music kicks on or then the lights turn on because their body is,
in tune. Yeah. It's like that body clock is working well.
Exactly. So then for those people, we suggest that they extend it to 2.5 just to go deeper, longer.
Okay. Yeah. And you did mention earlier in the interview about that 20-25 minute mark where you're getting a change in chemical release. So you need to be in that sensory deprivation period for at least for a period of time. So, Right. So I think, are there any other particular things about flotation I haven't covered properly that you think people should know about flotation?
Well, cannabis is legal where I live, and combining cannabis and floating, I am a strong proponent of. We are looking for maybe not a peak experience in a float tank or in a flotation therapy session, but we're looking for depth. All of us are looking for deeper meaning, for more purpose, for a better understanding of ourselves. And I've advocated for cannabis combined with flotation therapy for a long time because it's legal where I live.
And this is legal not just for pain control, is it?
It's legal recreationally.
Okay.
Yeah. So using cannabis and combining that with a float tank session is about as deep an experience legally that you can get. And I really do believe that, especially if it's eaten. If you eat a sucker or a candy or a brownie or a cookie or something and go into a float, I would suggest floating for longer than just an hour. I would do 2.5. But there is so much there in self-reflection, in depth of thought, in sort of the life analysis that we all should do a little bit more of, reflection of the self, thinking about the future, not in an anxious way, but in a way of like, well, what do I want? Who am I? Where do I want to go? What do I want to be? These are important questions that most of us don't think about anymore. We're just sort of tra-la-la, go to work, come back, watch Netflix, go to sleep, go to work, come back, watch Netflix. Like that's this cycle, and pumping the brakes and getting into that sort of experience, I think is almost shamanic. It's almost ceremonial. It's almost, which is something that I'm a proponent of too, is shamanism and regular ceremony. It's something that I think our bodies and our brains really need. Um, so I think that you should check that out if it's accessible to you and if it's possible for you. It's something that you should definitely look at.
Yeah, that could be fascinating for people.
Yeah.
And so again, they can travel to your center and go through that experience there.
Yeah.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something I hadn't even thought of.
Yeah. Yeah.
I could imagine again. You're in that. I'm thinking of you having done an 18-hour fast or a 24-hour fast. You're already in that ketone state, the nutritional ketosis. You do your workout, take some cannabis, and go into a float. Like, wow, you must be in a completely different space.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. For sure, man. Yeah, that's my thing, man. I love it.
Yeah. Okay. So, I just also want to touch on, because we've talked a lot about flotation, but I mean, you're a life coach and you also do other human optimization tips. So, if you wouldn't
Yeah.
mind just educating people a little bit about that.
Do you have another 2 hours?
Oh, we've got a few more minutes, so that's why I wanted to try and get it in. Because you said, I
Okay.
believe you got a workshop or something coming up. Do you?
I do. Yeah, I have a workshop coming up in late October. In fact, I'll plug that now. It's called Life MBA. It's October 28th at the W Hotel in Seattle. It's a full day workshop, and Life MBA. Oh wait, I'm live on Facebook and teasing this too early. Well, we'll see. Um, M stands for mind, B stands for body, and A stands for awareness. And this one day workshop is a culmination of everything that I've learned over the past 6 to 8 years. Coaching techniques, lifestyle hacks, biohacks, relationship framework, deep introspection, goal setting, negative thought patterns that you can replace with positive thought patterns, fasting, ketosis, yoga, floating, and then the awareness aspect is increasing your intuition. I get into some esoteric modalities and some metaphysical framework. I'm a light worker of sorts, and I work I work with the highest self. I work with people's spirit guides to tune people into themselves, to upgrade their non-physical intelligence, their non-physical bodies, their light bodies. So that's coming up. It's life-mba.com, and it's on Facebook Live. So for those of you who are cats out of the bag.
Breaking news.
Breaking news! Breaking news! So some of the other biohacks that I'm a big fan of cold water therapy, taking cold showers. There's a ton of supplements that I would suggest, but I think in general, what I would always suggest that people do is tinker around. I'm not big on tech. I'm not big on wearables. I'm not huge on Fitbits and heart rate monitor stuff. Like I'm not as interested in that as I am in a Himalayan salt soleil in the morning, or dry brushing, or cold plunges, or tongue scraping, or the Wim Hof breath work. Those are the things that I'm more interested in. And I think I think that people sort of get overwhelmed with, look, what am I supposed to do? Like, what am I supposed to do? Get a Fitbit and start tracking my steps? Well, fine. That's cool. But if you don't do anything about it, if it doesn't inform or lead to any action in any way, then it's, it's sort of useless information. So I would suggest none of us are performing to our optimal potential. Not a single. You're not, I'm not, the people that I work with are not. And we need to look outside of ourselves for resources, for coaching. My coaching website is seanmccormick.org. I think a lot of us would benefit massively from a life coach to sort of help us figure out not only what we want to do, but how we can get there. And from supplements to hacking sleep to floating to spirit guides, I think we all should tinker around a little bit.
Yeah, no, for sure. We're multifaceted, and the problem is I hear you. You know, too many people in this world are linear. They just, you know, it's like one data point, one thing. Whereas at the end of the day, the way I like to explain it to people is it's like a bucket, and you know, you've got different stimuluses that all fill up this bucket, but realize there's lots of different stimuluses, or like a pie chart. So who knows what's going to affect you? So just go and experiment, and that's biohacking. You know, N=1 stuff. You know, go self-experiment. Who knows what you're going to experience? So
Absolutely.
yeah. Well, Sean, thank you so much for educating us today on flotation. I mean, I can already think of so many cool biohacks that people could do with flotation. But if you wouldn't mind just sharing again where your 2 flotation centers are, where they're based, or what the website addresses are for people to contact you about flotation.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's Float Seattle in the Green Lake neighborhood of Seattle, just north of sort of the downtown area. It's 25 minutes from the SeaTac airport if you're flying into Seattle. That's floatseattle.com. And then Float Bellevue, floatbellevue.com. That's our other location, which is on the east side, on the other side of the lake. The float centers are 15 minutes away from each other. On Twitter, it's Float Seattle. On Instagram, it's Float Seattle. Wherever you are, you got to go do this, Gary. You got to go. You got to book it.
Yeah, I'm hoping so, because I'll be on the west coast of the States in October. So I'm hoping that maybe I'll get a chance to do some floating for the first time in my life.
Absolutely. There's a ton of float centers on the west coast of the States. Absolutely. Yeah, I think everybody should go do it. My coaching site is seanmccormick.org, and my workshop is life-mba.com. You can go to lifemba.com and buy a ticket.
Fantastic. Well, I'll put all those links in the show notes for people too.
Wonderful.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sean.
Thanks for having me. See ya.